Hi guys, this is Chaya and in today's video we are going to cover Salesforce Apex interview question and answers chapter 1. But before that, if you are new to our channel, then please like, share and comment to this video and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. So let's get started. So the first question is, what is trigger? So answer is, trigger is a piece of code that execute before and after the record is insert, update, delete or undelete from the database. For example, if you want that whenever an account phone is updated, then update associated contacts phone number. Then that thing we can achieve using triggers. So the second question is, what are the types of trigger in Salesforce? So answer is, there are two types of trigger in Salesforce. So first is before trigger and second is after trigger. So in before trigger are used to update the record or validate the record values before the record is saved to the database. For example, if you want to validate the contact phone number should not be empty while create or update of contact and throw the error if the field is empty. After trigger are used to access field values and make changes in other records after the record is saved to the database. For example, when we update the account phone number, then update that phone number on all its associate contacts. The record that fire after triggers are read only. So the third question is, what are the trigger context variables? Answer is, there are multiple trigger context variables like trigger.new, trigger.new map, trigger.old, trigger.old map, trigger.is before, trigger.is after, trigger.is insert, trigger.is update, trigger.is delete, trigger.is undelete, trigger.is executing and trigger.size. Fourth question is, what are the best practices to write a trigger? Answer is, one trigger per object. Second is, trigger should be bulkified. Third is, avoid using SQL query or DML statement inside for loop. Fourth is, avoid using SQL query without where clause in trigger. Fifth is, use appropriate null checks to avoid null pointer exception error. Sixth is, use handler and helper class and methods for trigger. Seventh is, avoid nested loop, means loop inside loop. So the fifth question is, what is the order of execution of triggers? The order of execution start with, first it fetches the data from database. Then the system validation will trigger and it will check the system validations. After that, all the before triggers or that object will be execute. Then the custom validation rules will be trigger and it will check the custom validation rules. After that, record will be saved but it will not committed to database now. Once the record is saved, then all the after event trigger will be execute. Once it is done, then finally record will be commit to the database. Sixth question is, which are the errors did you face in triggers? So we are facing so many errors like system.limit exception. That means it occurs when we hit the governor limit. Then system.dml exception. It occurs when we miss any required field. Second is system.null pointer exception. That means it occurs when we are trying to access field or variables that are null. Next is recursive trigger. It occurs when the trigger perform any action and invoke itself. Okay. Then fifth is like a system dot mixed DML exception. So when it will occur like DML on when we are performing the DML on setup and non-setup objects in a single transaction. So these are the errors we are facing while implementing the Apex triggers. Okay, so the seventh question is, what is recursion and how to avoid it? So the answer is, a recursive trigger is a trigger which perform an action like inserting, updating, which invoke itself or executing same logic again and again in a loop. For example, after insertion of account, insert another account which result in recursion. So how to avoid recursion? We have three ways. Like first is use static boolean variable, second is use static set, and third last but one is use static map. So the eighth question is, how to run a trigger in user context? Answer is, so all the triggers run in a system context by default. This means that trigger may have access to objects and fields that the current user does not have. So to run a trigger in user context, we need to write the trigger logic in a class and use with sharing keyword to the class so that that class will run our trigger logic in user context. So the next question is, what is the difference between trigger.new and trigger.old? So the answer is, for example, we are updating an account records phone number from 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, 6 and updating active pick list value from S to no. Then trigger.old will return the list of records with old values like having phone number 1, 2, 3 and active values like yes. And trigger.new will return the list of records with new values like having phone number 4, 5, 6 and active value is no. Next question is, what is the difference between trigger.new map and trigger.old map? Answer is, for example, if we are updating an account records phone number from 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, 6, then what will happen in trigger.new map will return the map of ID versus records where key will be the record ID and value will be the newly updated record, that is account record with phone number 4, 5, 6. And in trigger.old map, it will return the map of ID versus record where key will be the record ID and value will be the record with old values, that is account record having phone number 1, 2, 3. So let's jump on next question. What is the difference between trigger.new and trigger.new map? So the answer is, for example, if we are updating any account's phone number from 1, 2, 3 to 4, 5, 6, then trigger.new will return the list of newly updated record, that is account record with 4, 5, 6 phone number. And trigger.new map, it will return a map of ID versus records where key will be the record ID and value will be the record associated with that record ID. Next question is, tell me which trigger context variables are available for every trigger events. So the answer is, for before insert we have trigger.new. For after insert we have trigger.new and trigger.new map. For before update we have trigger.new and trigger.new map and trigger.old and trigger.old map. For after update we have trigger.new and trigger.new map and trigger.old and trigger.old map. For before delete, we have trigger.old and trigger.old map. For after delete, we have trigger.old and trigger.old map. For after undelete, we have trigger.new and trigger.new map. Next question is, what is mean by static and non-static methods in Apex? Answer is, if we create an Apex method as static, that means we can call that method directly like class name dot method name. If we create a method without static, that is non-static, then to call that method we need to create an instance of that Apex class and call that method like class instance dot method name. So that's the difference between static and non-static methods in Apex. So the next question is, why there is after undelete but not before undelete in Apex trigger? So the answer is, because there will be a no record available in before undelete event to update. But in after undelete event, you will be having a record to update something with that record. For example, let's say we have a custom object called project with a field called status. We want to update the status field to active whenever a project is restored from the recycle bin. In before undelete, the record is still in recycle bin and we can't access it until it's been restored. Okay, so in after undelete, we have a record to work with and we can update it as needed. Let's jump on next question. What is with sharing and without sharing keyword in Apex? Answer is, so in with sharing, if we declare a class as a with sharing, then that class will run in a user context. That means the sharing rules and access that the user has will be enforced to the class. And the class will perform the operation based on access of that user has. Okay. So in without sharing, by default an Apex class is without sharing. That means that Apex class will run in a system context. That means Apex class will have access to all objects and fields irrespective of the current user access and sharing rules. So that's all about with sharing and without sharing keyword in Apex. Next question is, what is Apex sharing in Salesforce? So the answer is, Apex sharing is a feature in Salesforce that allows us to share a records programmatically to any particular user or group of users. For example, we have a project object and we want to share records of project object to an user only. If the status of project records is completed, then by using Apex class we can first check condition in if condition block, that is status is equals to completed. Then by using project share object we can share the project record to the user or group of users and also set the record access level. So the next question is how to handle exception in Apex. So answer is, to handle the exceptions in Apex, what we can do is we can use try catch block. Okay, in try block we put the Apex code that may throw an error, and in catch block we handle the exception. Like we can use system.debug statements to print exception, or we can create a record in a custom error object with exception details. So by this way we can handle the exception in Apex. Next question is, what is synchronous Apex and asynchronous Apex? So answer is, synchronous Apex is a code that runs in a blocking manner. That means it executes code in a same thread and it executes immediately. And synchronous Apex is used for when we require immediate response. For example, Apex trigger is an example of synchronous Apex. So account phone update, then immediate update all related contacts phone with that account phone. So asynchronous Apex is a code that execute in a non-blocking manner. That means it execute code in a different thread. That is, it execute in a background. Asynchronous Apex is typically used for long-running operation to avoid slowing down UI. For example, batch Apex is an example of asynchronous Apex. Like updating 10,000 of records, we can use asynchronous Apex, that is batch Apex. So that's all about synchronous Apex and asynchronous Apex. So let's move to the another question. So what are the governor limits and how to avoid it? So answer is, Salesforce run on a multi-tenant environment. That means resources are shared with a multiple companies on the Salesforce platform. So to avoid their monopolization of shared resources and causing problems to other companies. So that's why Salesforce provide governor limits. Okay, so for example, we can perform 100 SQL queries synchronously and we can perform 200 SQL queries asynchronously. And synchronously we can perform DML 150 and asynchronously DML we can perform 300. So in one SQL query we can face maximum 50,000 of records, and on an object we can create maximum 2 master data relationship field. On an object we can create maximum 40 lookup fields on an object. So that's all about governor limits. And now let's jump on the topic, that is how to avoid the governor limits in Salesforce. So to avoid the governor limits, like we have to follow some best practices, like write a one trigger per object and avoid using SQL queries and DML statement inside the for loop. Okay, then Apex code should be bulkified. Use batch Apex if we are working on more than 50,000 of records, and use handler and helper Apex classes and methods to write a Apex logic. So it was all about the governor limits and how to avoid it. Okay, so this is the last question of chapter 1, that is what is mixed DML errors and how to avoid it. So the answer is, there are two types of S objects which is provided by Salesforce. So first is setup and second is non-setup. So in setup we have a user object, profile, group. Okay, and in non-setup we have a account object, contact object, opportunity object, and as well as a custom object. Okay, in a single transaction if we are performing DML operation on, for example, account and user object, then system doesn't allow it and throws an exception called mixed DML exception. So which means that we cannot perform DML operation on account and user object in a single transaction. Then next is how to avoid the mixed DML error. If we want to perform a DML operation on, for example, account and user object, then Salesforce doesn't allow us to perform DML operation and we get an exception, that is mixed DML exception. So let's see how to avoid mixed DML exception. We need to perform DML operation on both object but in a separate transaction. That means we need to perform DML on account object in a future method, that is asynchronously, and perform other DML on user object in another future method or in a normal method. So by using that way, we can avoid mixed DML exception in Salesforce. So guys, that's all about chapter 1. Okay, so if you like this video, then please do like, comment and share. If you have any queries or doubts, then please drop the message in comment box. And if you are new to our channel, then please subscribe it and hit the bell icon. And one more thing I want to tell to you guys, that in the description of every video I added all the social media links. You can join there for any latest update. So see you soon dear all in next chapter. Thank you all.